I'd like to turn today's presentation, Going Paperless with Adobe Sign, over to your first presenter, Sarah Linderman, Product Marketing with Adobe. Sarah, you have the floor.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Phil, for getting us started. I'm Sarah Linderman. I'm on the product marketing team, and I specifically focus on Sign for the education market. I'm also going to be joined today by Shelley Rodrigo, and Shelley is probably the reason that you decided to sign up for this session and attend today. She's our star. Shelley is the Senior Director of the Writing Program at University of Arizona, and I, of course, will give some time for Shelley to introduce herself. We're really excited to have you join us today. Before I dive into the content, I'll give you a quick preview of what the session is going to look like. So we're here on August 18th. The session for today is the first of a series we're calling the Voice of the Customer series. The intent is to kind of let you hear from somebody other than ourselves, let you hear from customers directly who are using Adobe Sign and learn a bit about their experiences. I'm going to open the session up and spend just maybe 10 minutes or so talking a little bit about the Adobe Sign experience overall for those on the call that may not be as familiar with it. And then we'll jump right in. I'll introduce Shelley, and we're going to have a little chat, a little interview for about 15 minutes or so, where Shelley will tell us all the ins and outs of her experience. And then we'll wrap up, and we'll have a nice 15 minutes at the end for some Q&A. So feel free to use that chat pod as we go along and drop in any questions that pop into your head. As Phil mentioned, we have a whole host of people on the call with us that are more than equipped to address any of the questions that you have. And one final note before I move from this slide is a note that this is, of course, part of an extended series. We have a lot of great on-demand content that's available. And then across the fall, we have several more sessions coming up. On the 25th, we're going to do a session that's about Adobe Sign and Workday. So if you or any of your colleagues touch the HR world of your school, that would be a great session for you to attend and learn about that integration. On September 15th, we're going to do an Adobe Sign plus Microsoft Teams focus session. That'll be collaborative. So we'll have somebody from Microsoft joining us as well. And then finally in October, we have another Voice of the Customer series similar to today, but we'll be hearing from Portland State. And just to note, I know some of you on the call might be in the K-12 world versus the university world, and that's fine. Note that everything we're going to be talking about is still going to be very much applicable to you as well. All right, before I dive into the content, I'd love to take a quick poll. You'll see two questions popped up here. One, what is your role? And two, asking you, why did you sign up for today? This is just so we can get a quick reading of the room to understand our audience and what you would like to learn, which hopefully we will cover. All right, a lot of IT, not a surprise there. That's usually the bulk of our audience. Finance, also not surprising. Great. Good. I love watching the little bars go up and down. How to support users. Great. That one with how to support users, by the way, there's a lot more detail on one of our sessions that's on demand right now about getting started with Adobe Sign. So if we don't get to your questions on that today, it'll be great for that. Signing PDFs, signing anything, yes. Considering Adobe Sign for the university, yeah, great. This is perfect. I think that you're going to be very happy with the content that we cover off on today. So feel free to keep adding in your thoughts on that question. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and jump us into the presentation. All right. So where I'd like to start, I kind of tend to think of this as a bit of a reality check. We do obviously a lot of polling, a lot of surveys to get a handle on what schools are doing as it concerns document workflows and document digitization. And shockingly, nearly 80% of the workflows on a typical campus today, that includes student-facing workflows, staff-facing, vendor-facing, are still paper-based. It's obviously a fairly old school approach. You have to print things out, and then you have to sign them and run them around. You have to scan them. You have to email them back. I think it goes without saying that this type of approach is a little archaic and it's pretty inefficient. It involves a lot of steps. It's complicated. It's slow. And for anyone who's involved in these workflows, which I'm sure a lot of you are, it results in a lot of time spent doing admin work. And it's taking time away from other things that you have to do, which I'm sure are many. So putting some numbers around this. There's a lot of pain points, again, associated with a traditional paper-based workflows. So we did this study with IDC recently, and we found that between the routing, signing, approvals, and tracking for a workflow, staff spend an average of 30% of their time engaged in manual paperwork processing. It's a lot. And it's not just time consuming, it's also error prone. Over a third of the people that participated in the survey noted that paper-based forms, they're often missing signatures, they're missing initials, they're missing dates. Maybe they get signed by the wrong person. They get lost, they get misplaced. It's hard to track them down when you need them after the fact. And so unsurprisingly, over 60% of the staff indicate that this gap in automation creates an unsatisfying experience for them. And note that this is just looking at the leadership and the people involved in the school. It doesn't even touch on what the experience feels like on the other side of things for students or for students and parents. So what happens when you go digital is that you effectively kill or reduce a lot of these pain points. Think about it this way, for each transaction, and we consider a transaction to be one document that's going out for signature, a school can save an average of 1.5 labor hours by going digital. And I know that sounds like a lot, but that's because there's so many steps involved in each transaction. And by reducing the time that's spent correcting those errors that we noted on the previous slide, schools can also further reduce the overall processing time. And then when you add up all the hard costs, all the soft costs, you can realize an average savings of $6 per transaction. So this is things like printer paper and printer cartridges and copiers and all the administrations and the machinery and the supplies that are involved. So this means for every 20,000 forms, just as an example, that you take digital, you can save your school around $120,000 and over 30,000 labor hours, which is pretty significant. And given where we are from an environmental standpoint, I think it's also really important to note that going paperless is something you can do for your school to make a really positive impact on the environment. Again, using that 20,000 forms number that you transition over to digital, you save thousands of gallons of water, hundreds of pounds of wood, significant amounts of energy and waste, and you put a footprint in carbon emissions. So with all the climate change going on, it's a pretty good thing. Let's get into the details then of what Adobe Sign is. Obviously, we're talking about going paperless and how it works. So Adobe Sign, from just like a strict definition point of view, is a cloud-based electronic signature service that simplifies, streamlines, and secures the process of gathering information and signatures. The way to use it, your users can send, view, and manage, and then legally sign, of course, documents from anywhere, anytime, any device, and that includes phones and tablets. But one of the big details that I like to highlight here is Adobe Sign, despite its name, really extends far beyond just signing. It helps you digitize the entire document processing workflow, from document creation to collaboration to execution to tracking and archiving. And it keeps everything secure and protected, and it makes all that related data easily discoverable. And we often hear that that's one of the biggest pain points for people in schools is, combing through filing cabinets to retrieve documents. That is not a fun thing. So just to visually reemphasize that last point I was making about how comprehensive Adobe Sign is, again, with Adobe Sign, you can really quickly turn paper, Microsoft Office documents, or PDFs into fillable, signable forms. You can then send them out for signature with just a single click. And again, your recipients can sign them from anywhere, anytime. And importantly, the documents are protected with very strict security measures and can be accessed, tracked, and managed from anywhere in real time. And one thing I want to point out here, because this is a common question received, is do the people signing need to have Adobe Sign or a special app or a sign-in or anything? And they do not. There's no sign-in required. There's nothing. They just get the document and they sign. Final point to make here is that Adobe Sign is also very much built to integrate with other key systems on the campus, especially Microsoft, we're their preferred e-signature partner, and that means that you don't have to worry about implementation challenges. All right, so where in your school can you use Adobe Sign? It's really built to support workflows all across your campus or school. It's great for operational workflows like vendor agreements, staff management needs, things like onboarding forms or academic research submissions. It's very valuable for student and alumni facing workflows, things like course management or donor forms when it comes to higher education. If you think about K-12, things like release and permission forms, IEPs are significant. And in all of these cases, when you think about it, using paper-based forms and wet signatures, again, requires tons of time, cross-coordinating between departments, individuals, and literally a lot of legwork. So when you go paperless with Sign, you simplify the routing procedures, you reduce trips to offices or campus, and things get accomplished much faster. It's really a much better experience for the entire campus community, everyone who's involved in that, all the way around. All right, I just have a couple more points to touch on before we bring in Shelley. One thing I wanted to talk about is just, there's obviously a lot of alternatives out there in the e-signature space. So why Adobe Sign? There's really 5 points that we'd like to highlight here. The first is just Adobe's trust and credibility. We've obviously been in the digital document solutions space and the creative space for a very long time. We're well equipped to provide the guidance and the expertise and the resources that your team would need to deliver success. We also make sure that you get the training and support along with that to get Sign up and running quickly. We know that that's very important, especially in schools. You just don't have the time or resources to focus on this, and it needs to be easy, and we get that. It's also easy to use, both for the sender and the signer. And I think Shelley will touch on that a little bit when we bring her in to chat about her experience. But we don't want it to be arduous for staff to learn because they have enough to do. And one of the things that actually supports that is the integration, which I had pointed out previously. So again, Adobe Sign is built to integrate. We can work seamlessly with a lot of the other IT systems that you have on campus. As an example, if your school works with any Microsoft system, it's particularly helpful because we are, again, Microsoft's preferred e-signature solution. So users don't need to leave their Microsoft environment to get work done. The fourth point I want to note is the workflow control. So with Adobe Sign users, and that's faculty, staff, admins, you can use our visual design tools to very quickly and easily build and test and refine workflows. There's no advanced coding needed. Anyone at the institution can tailor and automate that without being a technical expert. And then final point to note is compliance. Very important in schools, and Adobe Sign does meet the highest levels of global security and compliance standards. So we're using the same technologies and security engineering processes that are relied on by financial institutions, governments, and of course, educational institutions all around the world. I have one last thing to share before we move on, and that's a quick snapshot of some of the schools that are successfully using Adobe Sign today. And I like to share this because I think it gives some real world examples of the types of use cases that are being leveraged by other schools who are using Sign. Cal State Fullerton, student ID cards, they're processing them 6 times faster. Iowa State University Foundation, they focus on alumni donation workflows, and they've seen a 30% reduction in printing. University of New Mexico, they're heavily using Adobe Sign for all of the procurement-related workflows, which involves contracts, agreements, POs, a lot of different pieces. San Diego State is a great student-facing example. They've put Sign into working on the course management, which means a lot of back and forth trips to campus for students, and they've kind of made that much more seamless. And then we see a couple of K-12 districts, a large one in Texas, really effectively leveraging the Microsoft integration to run through over 40,000 transactions a year. One of our districts in Ohio really cites Adobe Sign as being one of the most critical tools to helping them shift to remote operations during all of the rigmarole of the pandemic. And that is all for me. So now on to the part that you're probably most excited about, which is the chance to hear about Sign directly from one of our customers about how she's using it to transform her research workflows in particular. I'd now like to go ahead and introduce Shelley Rodrigo. She's the Senior Director of the Writing Program at the University of Arizona. Shelley, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your role.
Sure. So just to clarify, Senior Director of Writing Program, that means I administer the academic unit that offers first-year writing courses. Most of you probably recognize those as courses like English 101 and English 102. But what's setting the stage for my experience with Adobe Sign, you're more interested in the fact that my online teaching experience is old enough to drink. I've worked as a full-time faculty member in both community colleges and research university settings. Not only do I teach online, I've spent 20 plus years researching and facilitating professional development about teaching with and through digital technologies. In the past 6 years, I've also administered an online writing program. My background of teaching and researching and administering online writing courses and programs is what brings me to this point of needing a digital signing solution. And I do, just before we jump into questions, I just wanted to say, for so many of the folks who are here, IT, finance, and you were saying that you wanted examples of success. And I think what I want to get your framework that I think the example of success I'll be for you is when you start looking around or making the argument for how Adobe Sign will help the campus beyond what people typically see with HR and finance workflows. So hopefully today I'm sharing a creative workflow that you hadn't thought of before.
Awesome, I love that. All right, so to get us started, Shelley, thank you for that introduction. Can you talk a little bit about the specific challenges of the workflows that you were experiencing kind of pre-sign that made you stop and think, I need a better solution to this?
So when working with online students and specifically trying to do research with online students, and I needed their permission for something, in the case of research, their permission that I'm using their information, my success rate plummeted because to get their permission, I would have to ask them to download a document. I'd send it to them. They'd have to download, print, sign, scan, upload, and send it back. I mean, pause with me here a second. Think back 15 years ago. Remember, I've been doing this a while, and how difficult it would be to get someone to go through all those steps. And now, even now, think about so many of our students increasingly or decreasingly don't own printers. I mean, that's not even an option for them. So as a researcher, I needed students to be able to easily consent as student participants in my research. And also as an administrator, and we'll talk about it, I also am looking for permission for sharing examples with student work. But using Adobe Sign has made those processes easier for me, and more importantly, easier for the students.
Awesome. So you, as you talked about, you were using it really for that research consent process. And I'm curious, can you dive into that a little bit more and provide us some specifics, how it works, who's involved again, the volume of the workflows? Talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. And if you can, that slide that yes, that one. So in short, the research consent process is that you need to recruit your participants, get them to, consent, usually signing off. And then after the consent, prompt them to do whatever it is you need them to do for the research. With online students, that usually meant more specifically either email or a course announcement, or could be a social media blast that needed to somehow link to the consent form. And just think about this for a second. Since March 2020, for 20 years, I've struggled to get online or digital consent. Now, all of my colleagues who need consent for the past year, almost year and a half, have struggled with the same thing. They've had to shift to recruiting digitally. Then the consent process is the actual sign. And like I said, it needed to be quick and easy or people were not going to do this. So the whole print, sign, scan, not happening. But then what also I'm excited about, by having a much more streamlined process, now can include a functional hyperlink at the bottom of a web form or the auto-generated email coming out of Adobe Sign that, again, streamlines a step of, instead of me having to follow up, it can just go ahead to the next stage of the research process.
That sounds significantly easier for something that's,
oh my gosh,
obviously a challenging process, right?
So much easier.
When you think of it, so ease is like one of the ease, efficiency, time savings. That's obviously one of the biggest benefits. But can you talk a little bit more about specifics of the impact? Again, we know it's easy, but how about participation rates? How about paper reductions? What are the other things that you might say have been, the positive impact of putting Sign into place here?
So I'll start with paper. Obviously, paper. I mean, in paper, both with the student participants, them having to print and sign, and then once they've done that, they don't need that paper anymore. Paper on my end of potentially then having to save that. But more importantly, just managing it for both the student participant and myself, so it's not just paper as in the hard copy, but also organization and management of the paper is so much easier. I confess I can't necessarily give you time because the scale in which I'm doing this is not probably on the level where, the adding up seconds or minutes is going to save me days, but bigger research projects, potentially it would. However, to me, the scale, the increase of rate of participation, the fact that now, and writing classes are small classes, so there's not a big cohort, especially if I'm only recruiting from my own student population. There's not a big cohort to work from, and if most of them are blocked from the initial step of just being able to consent, I did not get a lot of participants. Now I'm much more likely to have students at least initially consent because the act of consent itself, again, signing that form, is so much easier for them. They can get the message on their phone and they can do it from their phone and they are done.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to highlight because we're obviously really focused a lot of times on kind of the impact it has for staff and faculty, which is of course important. But there's also the student experience that's involved in this, and schools want the student experience to be as good as it possibly can. And digitization is really something that can help to impact that. And I think the way that you just walked through that, you can see that in action. So that's a great detail to point out. This touches on some of the points that you've already brought up, but just diving a little bit more deeply, what would you say makes Sign work for you? How does it make your life easier personally?
Well, I think I'm going to move back and forth between myself and students. Definitely, that last comment I made about online and mobility, I mean, that makes it work because once it's set up from my end, not only do students not have to do all the printing and signing and scanning, but it's so easy that they are more likely even to just do it instantly because they get it standing in line at the grocery store and can do it. But other interesting things. So even historically with consent forms for research participation, generally researchers are not checking ID forms. And there's something to be said about having a little bit more confidence in terms of who signed, especially when it can be connected with a student email. Interestingly enough, I also like for us that I use our Adobe Sign that's through our institutional license, and it's actually it's stamped by the Arizona Board of Regents. And so it's this weird, as a researcher, and when asking students to sign this document that's talking about things like risk, to have that branding is kind of nice. And again, I could do that on letterhead, but it's nice that it's kind of almost baked into the code, if you will. It's beautiful. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but the fact that there's so many different, both the interface of setting it up, like you said, what made this easier is, as a researcher, I didn't have to spend days trying to figure out this application to make it smoothly work for me. I had some person spend about a half hour with me, and bam, I was out the door running and could do this. And then not only is the interface easy, but it's really easy to quickly go like, oh, what are these other options? Oh, I might be able to use information collected or form fields or radio buttons. And it's easy to explore and easy to experiment with and imagine other other workflows I might do. What's interesting to me, the main function I love is there's a bunch of different functions, but I like what's called the web form because it allows me to, make the consent form, set up the fields like the date and the name and the space for them to put in their email. But then I can just send out one URL. And think about this. This is why that's relevant. If I were doing research in person and someone invited me to some event and said, we'll probably have about 50 people. And I'm like, okay, 50 people, maybe 40 will show, or maybe 40 will actually want to do it. So I'm only going to print 40 pieces of paper. And I get there and there's 100 people and I have 75 people who want to participate. I literally don't have enough copies. But with the web form, I have a single URL. It doesn't matter how many, I just keep sharing that URL and I get a new copy every time for, someone to read and sign. And then I also love just the easy notification. I mean, as a researcher, there's something, once you send out this invitation to the world to participate in your research, there's always this little anxiety is, will people do it? And so I just actually recently did this, and getting these immediate dings back in my email, notified that they submitted it, was gratifying. And I knew, but then I also wasn't worried, like if, my inbox is filling and I can just push it away, because I know also on Adobe Sign, I can log in and everything is there, everything is saved, ready to go.
I think that notification piece is great. I mean, I think the tracking aspect of the tool is really important, and kind of the dashboard view that's presented. So, I mean, especially if you're somebody who's in, let's say, like you're in an admin role where you have multiple forms that you're sending out to multiple different audiences, like all year round, right? It can be super complex to keep track of what's been signed, what's been sent, what's been received. And with Adobe Sign, we make sure that you have a very easy way to quickly get status on any document you're working on. And the web form is also a great feature. We often talk about that too as being a self-serve thing, because you're sending out that URL. But the other thing that can be done is if there's a form that students need to kind of access and fill out on their own, that URL can be posted on site, and then students go click the URL, pull it down, and it's very easy for them to get access to that form without having to send it out. So I'm glad that you highlighted those two items. I'm curious, again, there's a lot of solutions out there. There's a lot of different options. I want to know, like, how did you discover Adobe Sign? When you were looking for a solution, how did it come to be that you discovered, oh yeah, this is something I can use?
I lucked out. I stumbled, right place, right time. I stumbled across it. So I was already again, you can tell I'm active with teaching with technology, and I was already active. We're an Adobe Creative Cloud campus, and I was, connected with our Adobe folks. And it just so happens on a campus event, I was talking with folks and describing this problem, and one turned and looked at me and was like, "Why aren't you using Sign?" And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Well, the institution just started with it, and you're primarily using it." I think we originally started using it for reimbursement processes. So it was in finance that it started. And I'm like, "Oh, I know what that is. I've done that once." And went from there. A week later, I had a meeting scheduled. And like I said, 30 minutes later, I knew what I was doing and I was off. It was fabulous. Made my summer. That was at the end.
Knowing that it's like a quick and available solution that's out there. If you think about not just on your campus, but other campuses out there, what other types of departments and workflows do you think could benefit from Sign in the way that you have?
Well, I mean, I feel like, especially with the folks who, saw on the beginning, who here, you all have a really good sense of typical HR and finance workflows. But I think that what I'm going to try to remind you is that, teachers, the faculty side of the house, especially in higher ed, we have, and it might be more simplistic. So like some of the HR and finance workflows have multiple steps, but faculty and more middle level administrative managers like myself, if you will, a lot of times we have things where we just want certain permission forms, or we just need, I think K through 12 is the best example of sending it out for approval to parents, very quick ways to get that. And so I think it's part of what's interesting about Sign is trying to make sure, like, once your institution has adopted it, or you're trying to convince the institution to adopt it, is bring in a variety of people across campus and show a variety of different options, because then what it'll allow, both functionalities, again, like the, radio buttons and dates and fill in the blank, but also a variety of different options or ideas, because people know what processes they do, and a lot of them are doing little things, again, faculty especially, we're doing little things that you might not be aware of, but would greatly benefit from this, and greatly benefit from the fact that the learning curve is so shallow. It's one thing to say, faculty, you should use this. However, it's going to take you 2 full days to learn, and we'll laugh at you. But faculty, you should use this. You'll be up and running in 20 minutes. That's fabulous.
Okay, that's definitely an important point. I think that there's such a fear of adopting yet another technology onto any
Absolutely.
campus, right? Because everybody knows that it's just yet another thing that needs to be learned and replaced. And I think it's important to know that this really is something that people can get up and running quickly with. Once you get over that, that hump of there is the acceptance aspect of it, but once people are open to it, it's a very easy tool to start using. It's intuitive. Um, you mentioned like there's still other things that you're working with and want to continue to explore and learn more as you dive more into Sign. What are some of those features that you would like to explore a little bit further with Sign?
Well, I have a very particular one. So again, we made a slide to represent this. So as an administrator, we, in the writing program, we want examples of student papers associated with either specific learning outcomes or specific assignment prompts. And the typical process for getting that is sending out an email to instructors saying, hey, do you have students who did really good papers on this? We'd like, and then it puts the onus on the instructor to ask the student. And the permission form that our legal department approved requires a bunch of information, instructor name, course section number, assignment, the title of the assignment, the title of the assignment submission, all this to say lots of details. And lots of details that if we put all of that on the student, again, back to the same problem that I originally had. If we ask the student to put all that information, it's not going to get done. I mean, I hate admitting it, but yeah, we occasionally have students that try to drop off papers, at least before the pandemic, drop off papers at our writing program office. And the first question will be like, well, who's your teacher? We need to know to put it in their box. And the student will look at them and go like, I don't know. I don't remember their name. And so what I'm excited right now to be trying to figure out and play with Sign is that kind of multiple person workflow, the ability to send out a document that would first have the teacher fill in certain information, and then it would push further to the student, and where ideally, the teacher would fill in most of the information and the student, all they should have to do is sign. Again, at this point, I'm trying to get better return rate from students, and if we can cut down on what they need to put in, they're more likely to do it. But as an administrator, I don't have that information. I need the teacher to put that information in. So right now, what I'm excited about figuring out and using is kind of layered process of multiple people adding information to the document before it finally cycles to the student, and then they sign it and it cycles back to us.
So it's
and I
really
know
kind
we
of
can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're on the road. Are you starting to kind of get there, explore it?
Explore it. Right now, it's just time and energy.
Yeah.
And classes start next week. So hopefully in a couple weeks, I'll be resurrecting this. And if I get stuck, reaching out. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Shelley, this has been really illuminating. Thank you for kind of going into details and letting us hear all about how you've been using it and what that experience has been. I hope that the audience has enjoyed learning all this. I am going to open it up in a little bit for Q&A. Hopefully, people took a lot of weight from this. They might have some details more that they'd like to hear from Shelley, or questions related to the product experience in general, or anything that's on your mind. We're happy to address those. Before I move there, I'm going to pull up another quick poll here. A couple more questions. One, are you currently using any Adobe solutions on your campus? And also, are you using any document digitization solutions on your campus? Just so we can get a feel for kind of, again, what the usage patterns looks like around here. Cool. Adobe Sign, DocuSign, other. If you're putting in other, I'd love for in the chat pod if you can drop in detail on what the other solutions you're using might be. That'd be super helpful. Cool. All right. All right, so we're going to move into the final phase, into the wrap up. Before I go to Q&A, just a few next steps. I've got 3. One is encourage you to check out and share resources that we have related to Sign. A few that I would recommend. We have a very cool savings calculator tool, so you can kind of enter in your specific numbers and see how much you could potentially save your school. 2, we have a resource hub that has a ton of, it has that calculator tool and just a lot of other great resources, webinar access, on-demand signups, everything, a great tool, and you can see the links for that. And then finally, we have a new little 2-pager that kind of just talks about going back to school with Adobe Sign, in general, those benefits. Second next step, join us for our future webinars. So next week we have Sign and Workday. In mid-September, we have the Sign and Microsoft Teams session. And on October 6th, the Voice of the Customer, Portland State. You can access those and find out information on them on that resource hub. And then finally, if you want more information or you want a custom demo or any custom help, contact your rep, get something set up. We are more than happy to help with that. All right, now I'm going to move us into Q&A. So definitely encourage you to stay on the line and ask away, ask any questions. Mike and I will be kind of seating these up and answering them. Mike, do you want to take it away with the questions?
Yeah, hello everybody. So the first question is kind of around, excuse me, is around the governance strategy of deploying Sign within the institution. So I'm curious, Shelley, if you have any insight into how is Sign deployed within the institution among other departments. I know you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but is there an overall strategy to getting additional users and departments to use it to kind of broaden outwards? And then a follow-up question to that is obviously billing of using Sign, depending on the type of contract that you have. Is this something that is typically done centrally managed? Is it on a department basis? So I'll leave it at that.
I will probably not be able to get the level of detail that looks like that Jason and Oscar were asking about. So again, I'm going to say I'm on the academic side of the house, and even though I'm the equivalent of a department head, if you will, or a department chair, I'm still relatively low middle management and academic side. So I think in terms of the governance strategy and kind of recruitment strategy, again, it's more on business side of the house. And I kind of stumbled across it, and I've shared it with colleagues, or like I now have a research team, and when I needed them to set it up, we actually kind of had to go seeking out to get their account started, and especially like even when they got their account started, the web form function wasn't turned on for their account. So all that to say is, at least to the best of my knowledge, I'm not seeing and feeling something that's a very strategic plan in terms how to distribute this. But again, I think probably more typical HR and finance units are being recruited into it. As far as the money question, I have no idea. I'm so sorry. I wish I could answer that for you. But I am delightfully, and I mean, I guess on some level, at least myself and probably the growing number, but still relatively small research and academic users probably is small enough that we're not pestering. I don't know in terms of usage, but I wish I could answer that question for you, and I can't. Sorry, I wish someone was here.
Yeah, no, totally understand it, and I assume that's not really a question best for your role within the institution, but we'll definitely have experts follow up those that are curious about that to kind of give more information on other customers, how they manage how they centrally managed in terms of billing and governments and everything like that. So another question that I can answer myself, what package, or I guess which tier of Adobe Sign do you need to have web forms? And the good news is every version of Adobe Sign as the standalone Sign product includes access to web forms. So while there are sign capabilities built into Adobe Acrobat, for example, that doesn't include web forms, but if you subscribe to Adobe Sign as a standalone product, it will include the access to web forms. I'm looking through here at the other questions. So a question came in asking about if you were, for example, to receive a form from a vendor that hasn't been sent through Adobe Sign, how would you typically sign that, and can you use Adobe Sign for it? So Shelley, I'm not sure if that's a question that probably comes into your department.
I don't
very
think
often.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Donna. Yeah, I think Donna. I know that you addressed this in the chat pod. Donna, can you directly address that question? Donna may be on mute. I'm not sure, but the answer is that yes, you can integrate forms that may have been created in other applications like Microsoft applications, or they can be open in Acrobat. So yes, you can take other forms and then you can turn them into the intelligent forms and integrate that into Adobe Sign.
Yep, and I'll add on to that. So even within, you can definitely use Acrobat for it, and even within Adobe Sign, so there's a separate feature called fill-in sign within Adobe Sign, where if someone were to have sent you a document that they need you to sign for them, now preferably they would be an Adobe Sign customer and they would send it out to you using Adobe Sign for you to do one click and sign it. But if they were to just send you, for example, a PDF, you can then open that PDF, you can upload it into Adobe Sign, use the fill and sign tool to add an electronic signature with that, and then you can send them either a link to that signed document, or you can download the signed PDF, and then you can actually see that you signed it using Adobe Sign, and hopefully that opens their eyes. They can be using Adobe Sign to send things out as well, but you can always electronically sign any document that comes to you, no matter how it's delivered to you.
Awesome. See, I am scrolling through and I think that we've kind of covered off on the questions. Usually we have such a slew of them, but it's been relatively light. Are there any final questions either for Shelley and her experience or otherwise? Good. Well, thank you, Mike, for queuing those up. And again, thank you so much, Shelley, for joining us and sharing. That was a really great session. I hope that everyone who was able to join today had a good time with us. And I think that brings us to a close.